This is the first in a series of 6 videos in which I will try to explain the Latin passive voice, how to recognize it, and what it does. Because English and Latin are related languages, and because what works in Latin usually, in some way, works in English, I think it will be useful if, in this first video, I were to talk about the passive voice in English. Let us then begin with this sentence. A lion is eating the boy. This is a statement in the active voice. The focus here is on the lion. The lion is doing something. We can list the various parts of this statement in this way. The subject, the lion. The verb is eating, and the object, the boy. Let us turn now to a statement in the passive voice. The boy is being eaten by a lion. This is, as I say, a statement in the passive voice, and the focus here is on the boy. The boy is being eaten by the lion. Again, let's list the various parts of this statement. We start with the patient subject. This may be a somewhat unusual way of looking at the boy, and indeed in the ordinary sense, the boy is hardly terribly patient. If I were being eaten by a lion, I think the last thing I would be was patient. However, it is a good technical description. The boy is, in the formal sense, the subject of this sentence, but the boy is not actually doing anything. The boy is not threshing around, the boy is not screaming, the boy is not trying to escape. Or he might be, but the statement doesn't say that he is. All the statement says is that he is being eaten. Something is being done to him, and so he is the subject of the sentence, but he isn't doing anything in the sentence except being eaten from the feet upwards, for all I know. The verb is being eaten. I'll say nothing about the verb. English verbs are English verbs. Then we have the agent subject, a lion. Here, in the formal sense, the lion is not the subject of the sentence. Skipping ahead, in the Latin version of this statement, the lion would be in the ablative case. Since the lion would not be in the nominative, it is not in the normal course of things the subject. But of course the action of the verb is being done by the lion. The lion is the real agent in this statement. It's the lion who's doing the eating. And so the lion is not the subject in the nominative sense, but the lion is the subject. Therefore we call the lion the agent subject. And that broadly is what you do with the passive voice in English. And again, because as I said, English and Latin are related languages, that is how the passive voice works in Latin. I suppose we can be lucky that English has a passive voice and that it works in much the same way as in Latin. This being said, you don't really need a passive voice in a language. There are many languages in Europe, that do very well without a passive. My wife's language, Slovak, for example, the grammar books, the older grammar books that is, do talk about a passive voice, but it's completely absent from the spoken language, and none of the Slovaks I've ever spoken to has admitted to knowing the existence of a passive voice. You don't really need it. Its use in these two statements is simply to show emphasis. In the first statement, a lion is eating the boy. We're focusing on the lion. In the second statement, the boy is being eaten by a lion. We're focusing on the boy. I have no doubt that with a little inventiveness, We could think of bringing out these differences without having an entire grammatical category for it. However, there's no point complaining about English. Let us instead be glad that English, like Latin, has a passive voice, and that the passive voice in English provides a very good guide to how the passive voice is used in Latin. Now, before concluding this video, I will make a general observation that applies very much to English and that applies in weaker force to Latin. There is a general prejudice in English against using the passive voice or against using it too often. The problem you'll find with using the passive voice is that often the grammar breaks down and you don't actually know who is doing the action of a verb. But far more often than that, a statement cast in the passive voice will go on and on with many more words than are needed. Have a look at this example. I start with a statement in the passive voice. Latin is more likely to be learned by children who are sent to independent schools than by those who are sent to state schools, where they are prepared for a life of sweeping chimneys. There's your statement in the passive voice, and that works out at 34 words. If you rewrite the sentence in the active voice, you get this. Children are more likely to learn Latin in independent schools than in state schools, where they prepare for a life of sweeping chimneys. There you have the same said in 23 words, 11 words fewer, about a third down. And it is a much crisper sentence. It's a sentence which is much more easy to understand. And so if you're writing in English, you should not absolutely shun the passive voice. It is there and it does have a function, but you should ask yourself, does this really need to be in the passive voice? And if you're translating into Latin, I do advise you to ask the same question. This being said, the passive voice does have an entirely legitimate use. It is useful when you want to focus on a patient subject, and if you're not interested in the agent subject of a statement. Have a look at this. I was robbed of my purse, never my dignity. This statement doesn't actually tell you who robbed me of my purse and who failed to rob me of my dignity. And it's not terribly important either, because the whole emphasis of the statement is on me and my reaction to an undoubtedly untoward event. But this is the end of the first video. In the next video, I will talk about the present passive in Latin. Thank you for watching this video.